Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from RAU'S IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of RAU'S IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified. The what, why and how of the newspaper analysis from the Civil Service Examinations perspective. So today we are going to discuss the Hindu Daily Edition dated 4th October 2022. The topics which are to be discussed have been displayed on your screen and the time stamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. So now let us begin our discussion. Our first topic is every drop counts. This topic is very important and has appeared in today's The Hindu Daily Edition in the editorial section. This topic has appeared at page number 6 and is in relation to the performance of a very important scheme which all of you might have heard about, Jal Jeevan Mission. As far as this syllabus is concerned, this topic directly falls under the General Studies Paper 2 section because it mentions the government policies and interventions for the development in various sectors and issues arising out of their design and implementation. Moreover, if you go by the previous year question paper analysis, there are several questions which ask you to analyze the performance of various schemes which are run by the central government. The context of this very editorial in today's newspaper is that there have been certain data which are out in the news. According to some of those data, they suggest that under the Jal Jeevan Mission, which is led by Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation, about 53% of the eligible population now have the tap water access. So as from the context, it is very clear that Jal Jeevan Mission aims to provide tap water supplies to rural households. So in this session, what we are going to deal with is India's present water situation, the broad objectives as well as components of the Jal Jeevan Mission, the performance of this scheme since 2019, what are the existing issues in this particular scheme, and what can be a way ahead to reap the maximum potential out of this scheme and to achieve the objectives of providing safe and adequate drinking water to all the rural households as a tap supply. So first of all, as far as the India's water situation is concerned, India is among the top 10 countries with respect to the share of the water resources available to each country. India has around 4% of the total water resources available to any countries, but the problem is that India has around 16 to 17% of the global population also. So the population load of India is very much higher vis-a-vis the water resources available with India. Further, we also know that in the backdrop of rising economic growth and development, the urbanization is also increasing. As more and more number of people are flocking towards urban cities, the urban areas are getting crowded. It is expected that this increase in urbanization will lead to increase of 77% of the water demand by 2050. Further, the living standards of the people are also increasing. So with the increase in the living standard, let's say the consumeristic tendencies of the population also increase. Their purchasing power increase, their buying capacity increase, and that is why the materialism also grows. And in this overall scenario, the resource consumption increases. And we all know that water is one of the most important resources. Further, coming to the next point, in 2018, Niti Aayog's Composite Water Management Index indicated that in the near future, around 21 cities of India are going to face a zero-day situation. Now, what do you mean by zero-day situation? It is a time period whereby any city does not have the drinking water for one day. That means the city reaches to such a critical situation that the drinking water facility for one day is entirely disrupted, it is entirely zero, and that is why it is known as the zero day. And around 21 cities in India is going to face this situation in the near future. Further, the report also said that around 75% of the total households in India, as far as the rural context is concerned, are not having adequate drinking water facilities. Now this adequacy in terms of drinking water can be in both the terms, that is quantity or quality. And in this very regard, the Jal Jeevan Mission was started by the government. As far as the latest development is concerned, in the budget 2022, around 60,000 crore rupees were spent to achieve the objectives of this very particular scheme, that is the Jal Jeevan Mission. So that is why now we are going to discuss the broader objectives as components of the Jal Jeevan Mission. So the main objective of the Jal Jeevan Mission is to provide safe drinking water to the rural household by 2024, which means it is again not just focusing on the quantitative aspect, it is also focusing on the qualitative aspect, and ensuring the required quantity as well as high quality of drinking water to all the rural households by 2024 is its objective. To achieve this very objective, Jal Jeevan Mission has 4 components. First, it is focusing on piped water supply. That means that the water supply to the rural households will be taking place through the piped water. The second important component is the reliability of the water sources. Obviously, this piped water is dependent on the various water sources. For example, let's say groundwater, surface water, glacier waters, spring waters, etc. So, the whole mechanism of this piped water supply is to be based on the water resources, and management and conservation of those water resources is also important. For example, the government will also promote the conservation of the groundwater reservoirs, let's say by means of regular and periodic aquifer recharge, etc. The third important component is improved networks. Because we all understand that yes, presently also there are certain rural areas whereby the piped networks are still there. But this Jal Jeevan Mission is also focusing on increasing the efficiency of the existing networks in those areas. The fourth important component is water quality as well as testing. This scheme is also based on increasing the water treatment plant infrastructure. So at the village level, there will be small or large water treatment plants depending upon the population size of several villages as well as Gram Sabhas. So these are the various objectives of this mission and components. It was launched in 2019 and therefore a significant time has been passed. And that is why it demands out of us that we should analyze the performance of this particular scheme. So now whenever we have to discuss or analyze the performance of any scheme, there are 2 aspects. The first is the goals which it has achieved till now. And second is the critical analytical part, that is what are the existing issues which are still hindering any scheme. As far as the goals or the positive aspect of this particular scheme is concerned, the data suggests that since 2019, around 6 states in India have achieved 100% of piped water supply to all the rural households. Further, since this scheme has started, around 5.6 crores of households have got the piped water supply in addition to the existing base which was there before 2019 period. Similarly, as far as the percentage of this household population is concerned, around 45 to 55% of the households in rural areas now have the drinking water supply. However, in today's newspaper, the data which is quoted is from a private survey company, and that company has suggested that around 65% of the rural households are now getting the piped water supply. But the main issue in that data is that the sample space of that particular study is very less. So that is why obviously the data of that particular survey is not very much credible, but these data are from the government resources, and that is why in the examination or in the interviews we will be quoting the data which are there by government or other important NGOs or civil society organizations which have certain credibility. So this is the performance of Jal Jeevan Mission in these 3 years period. But then there are certain existing issues which are hindering the prospects of this very scheme. So the first major issue is that every region has its unique challenges. We all understand the various physiographic divisions in India. There is a huge variation in rainfall distribution across India. There is again a huge variation in the groundwater potential across various regions in India. So that is why every region or every state has its unique challenges, and that is why the one size fits all approach will not be working in India. So, to provide the piped drinking water supply to all the villages of hills, plateaus, plains, northeastern areas, border areas is very difficult. The second important issue is that still there is a huge chunk of population which is highly dependent on the traditional sources. Now, obviously, the data suggests that around 45 to 55% of the population is getting the pipe drinking water supply, but still there is around 45 to 50% of the population which is not getting the piped drinking water supply. And this huge population is still dependent upon the traditional sources. Let's say the water which is being extracted from the wells, or the women still have to go to a very huge distances to collect the waters, and this phenomenon especially in the areas which are having semi-arid conditions. Here I would like to point one very important thing which is a social evil but a necessity, or what we can say, you just go to internet and read about one thing, the concept of water wives prevalent in India's particular region. What do you understand by water wives? Right? Now, coming to the third issue is that there is a huge regional disparities among various states. On one hand, we have states like Tamil Nadu, Goa, Himachal Pradesh, where we are able to provide the pipe drinking water supply. But on the other hand, we have Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, etc. states where still there is a huge gap in providing this facility. Now, if you closely analyze this particular thing, you can easily guess that because Tamil Nadu is in the southern India, they have better governance structure. Moreover, it does not faces the extreme climatic variability across the 12 months period. Similarly, Goa is a coastal state, and Himachal Pradesh is a hill state, a small state, better to manage, and having adequate surface water resources. On the other hand, these states are having more or less semi-arid conditions. For example, the Bundelkhand region of UP and MP, the interior Deccan region of Maharashtra, and Rajasthan. So obviously we all know about the climatic conditions. So not just the human factors, but the variation in the natural factors is also one of the biggest reason for having the wide regional disparity. And the last challenge is increased chlorine contamination to the water which is provided by these taps to various areas. There have been instances that in order to purify the water, in order to ensure its quality, sometimes the chlorine which is added to that particular amount of water increases or breaches the safe limits, and that is why there have been instances of chlorine contamination in certain areas. So obviously we need to tackle these existing issues. And now we shall look at the last component, that if there are certain challenges, what we can do, what can be a way ahead. First is focusing on those villages which have existing piped water supply. So in those areas, we need to identify the remaining households which are not having those piped water supplies, and retrofitting facilities must be given to them. The second important thing is that we must decentralize this scheme. So on paper, this scheme is already working on bottoms up approach. That is obviously the decentralized, because the Gram Sabhas or the village panchayats are being given adequate power. So we must focus to increase or strengthen this decentralized tendency, and we must build treatment plants which are based in those villages only and managed by the Gram Sabhas. The third important thing is there are certain areas whereby we are having adequate and plenty of solar energy. So in those areas, we must focus on solar based supply systems We must not be consuming a lot of energy based on conventional sources in order to pump up the water and supply them to the rural areas. Because then, yes, on one hand, we will be providing water to the population, but on the other hand, we will be deteriorating our natural base of resources. So that is why the solar based supply systems must be worked upon. The next important thing is that special focus must be given to the schools and hospitals and other common places. Among the schools and hospitals also, the primary schools or the pre-primary areas, the primary health centers must be given focus, because it has been observed that when it comes to the tertiary hospitals, there are several services available. But when it comes to the primary health centers like dispensaries or Aishman clinics, there we do not have the required services, and that is why in those areas we must give piped drinking water supply having adequate quantity and quality. And last but not the least component is obviously the overall water conservation and harvesting. The policies must be designed to manage, preserve, and conserve all the sources of water, whether those are surface water or those are groundwater. So, this is all about the Jal Jeevan Mission. This was a bit lengthy topic, so we will revise this topic in brief once again. So initially we looked about the present India's water situation. We understood that despite having 4% of the total water resources and coming in top 10 countries, still the water demand in India is very much higher compared to the supply of this water. We understood the concept of the zero day, which was mentioned in Niti Aayog's 2018 Composite Water Management Index. And then we discussed that how much budget is allocated in this year for the Jal Jeevan Mission. Next, we discussed about the broad objectives as well as the components of the Jal Jeevan Mission, which is to provide the safe drinking water to all the rural households by 2024. And because this scheme was launched in 2019, and after passing a considerable time, then we looked at the performance of this very mission. We analyzed that around 6 states have got 100% of the drinking water supplies in their rural areas. There have been a significant increase in the households after the launch of this scheme as far as the pipe drinking water is concerned. And further, there are around 15 states in which 100% goal is achieved, especially in their schools. But then, despite all these merits, there are certain existing issues in terms of unique regional challenges, high dependence on traditional sources, wide regional disparity, as well as increased instances of chlorine contamination. In order to deal with all these issues, in the last, we discussed that what can be a way ahead. It can be a five-pronged strategy focusing on the retrofitting in the remaining households of those areas whereby there is existing pipe water network, focusing on establishing treatment plants in the villages, focusing on the solar based supply systems, special focus on the common places like schools and hospitals, as well as overall focusing on the water conservation, preservation, and harvesting technologies. So that is all about this particular topic. Now moving towards our next topic. This topic has appeared at page number 12 and is in relation to another very important aspect. The context of this very topic is that now the government is thinking that they will link the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme with the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana in order to tackle the challenges of land degradation as well as desertification. Now, this is a very good step as far as this particular perspective is concerned. From the UPSC scheme of syllabus, this topic falls mainly under two sections. One is where we have to analyze the government policies, that is in General Studies paper 2. And the second is that it can also be linked to the environment aspect. So in this very line, in today's session, we are going to discuss the basics of land degradation, desertification, the factors which impact this land desertification, how Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana is going to help us to tackle this particular challenge, and besides this particular scheme, what are the other steps which the government can take in order to reduce this land degradation. So first of all, let us look at the present scenario as far as the land degradation in India is concerned. Now this color codification shows us the land degradation map of 2018 to 19. It shows that almost 30% of the Indian land is under desertification. Now what do you understand by land degradation or desertification? The land degradation is defined as a decline in the productivity of the land in terms of biodiversity and economy, resulting from various causes including climate or anthropogenic factors. That means if any particular piece of land is reducing its productivity to support the biodiversity, we will say that this land is getting degraded in terms of its natural capability and capacity. So this is basically the land degradation. Now there are few areas which are highly prone to land degradation. For example, the areas of Rajasthan as well as the northern Gujarat, the areas of Deccan, especially the interior part, similarly the areas of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh as well as Odisha. Now one thing is very common in all these areas. That is, if you closely analyze and stress upon your foundational learnings, you will come to know that those areas which either are having arid or semi-arid conditions are particularly vulnerable, or those areas which are primarily dominated by mining activities or industrial activities are vulnerable. But again, now this particular region, that is the northern plains belonging to the Ganga and Yamuna system, are also increasingly becoming vulnerable to the land degradation, especially because of the human made factors. For example, excessive extraction of the groundwater. Similarly, if we go to the northeastern part of India, the most dominant factor of land degradation and desertification in this particular region is shifting cultivation. So the point is that almost all of the India is facing the issue of land degradation. The intensity might differ, but this is a reality. The other thing which is different is that every region has its unique factors. As we have already discussed that, let's say in the western areas, the unique factor, the dominant factor of land degradation is the natural climate. In eastern plateau region, it is the mining activity. In northeastern part, it is shifting cultivation. In the northern plains, it is extraction of groundwater. So now we will see that what are the general direct causes of land degradation. First is deforestation of the unsuitable land. Many a times it happens that the natural forests are cleared in order to support the population, in order to grow crops, or many a times it is believed that because that land is not very much suitable, so we can cut the trees. Similarly, the second factor is overcutting of the natural vegetation. One is the cutting to meet the demands, and other is cutting in excess of the demands, which is an entire wastage. Neither it is meeting our demands and nor we are able to conserve it. So we are facing the double loss in this particular scenario. The third important factor is the agricultural related causes. For agriculture, we cut down trees. In agriculture, we use excessive chemical fertilizers, that is the unbalanced fertilizers use. And further, because of excessive irrigation, these fertilizers move towards other areas and pollute the land in distant areas as well. Excessive use of these chemical fertilizers and pesticides is increasing the frequency and intensity of the soil erosion also. The fourth important factor is the shifting cultivation. Now, shifting cultivation is one of the natural types of agriculture practicing, but this shifting cultivation was sustainable if the required amount of time is provided to allow the land to regain its natural fertility. But because of the increasing population demand, the frequency of shifting cultivation has drastically increased. And that is why the fallow periods have drastically reduced. Further, as we all know that land is a scarce resource and population on the other hand is increasing, So we are extending our cultivation practices into areas of natural disasters and hazards. Further, the canal irrigation also has its own challenges. For example, the seepage of water, which in turn increases the problem of salinity as well as waterlogging. So, salinity as well as waterlogging, both of these things further increase the land degradation. Then we are also not aware about the soil conservation management practices, or in the other case, even if we are aware about these practices, we are not sensitized enough to adopt or implement these practices. For example, almost every farmer knows that in semi-arid areas it is not visible to grow rice or wheat, that is water intensive crops, but still we are growing it. Almost everyone understands that stubble burning in long run is detrimental to not only the human health but also agriculture as such, but still we are practicing this stubble burning. So that is why soil conservation and management practices are not being implemented. And last is over pumping or over extraction of the groundwater. It has been reported that Punjab, Haryana, UP, and Bihar plains, this particular region is particularly facing or highly vulnerable to this very problem because of excessive digging of the tube wells and excessive use of the groundwater. The frequency of the critical blocks in these areas are rising. Critical blocks are basically those areas which lack in groundwater or where the groundwater table has gone beyond certain levels. So these are some of the direct causes of land degradation as well as desertification. In this very sense, as far as the policy measures are concerned, at the international level, we have a very important challenge, that is the Bond Challenge. Now, Bond Challenge is a global effort to bring around 150 million hectares of world's deforested and degraded land into restoration by 2020, and 350 million hectares target is for 2030. At United Nations meeting for climate change, that is in 2015 in Paris, India joined this voluntary bond challenge pledge, and it pledged that it will restore around 30 million hectares of degraded and deforested land by the year 2020 and additional 8 million hectares by 2030. An interesting aspect in this very sense is that India's pledge is one of the largest as far as Asia is concerned. Now, this was all about the land degradation and desertification. Now we shall move that how Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, that is the very context of today's news article, how its integration with MG Narega will help us to reduce this particular problem, that is land degradation and desertification. Now, Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana has four important components in it. And as the name is suggesting, it is basically focusing on the Krishi Sinchai part, that is irrigation for agriculture. So that is why its all four components is focusing on this very aspect. The first component is Accelerated Irrigation Benefit Program. It specifically focuses on strengthening the existing major as well as medium irrigation projects. The second important component is Har Khet Ko Pani. Now this specifically focuses on the minor irrigation projects, that is, let's say this was the major or medium canal line which was being coming from river towards a particular region. But in this particular region there are several agricultural fields, and these agricultural fields are obviously randomly distributed. So if you have to supply the water from this major canal to these agricultural fields, you need to have certain minor canal networks also. So what you will do, you will bifurcate these waters into all these agricultural fields in such manner. So this is that Har Khet Ko Pani, which means that every agricultural field will be getting the water or actually the benefit of all the irrigation projects. The third important component is per drop more crop, which says that in order to provide the irrigation to the agricultural fields in India, we will not just rely on the major, medium or minor canal network, but we will also increase the utilization of several other irrigation projects or irrigational inventions, for example, drip or sprinkler methods. So in a way, now per drop and more crop is focusing on the micro aspect. Now if you closely analyze major, medium, minor as well as micro component, all the components are taken are within the ambit of Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. The drip and sprinkler irrigation are known to reduce the water wastages, and that is how it increases the water use efficiency. The fourth important component is the watershed development, whereby the planning will be based on the regional basis, and that planning will include the real-time measurement as well as monitoring of the water resources available in that particular watershed. So what exactly all these four components are trying to do? They are trying to reduce the water wastage and they are trying to increase the water use efficiency by promoting the irrigation in the agricultural fields. Now this will help to increase the vegetation. This will help to reduce the soil erosion. This will increase or rather preserve the groundwater resources. So that means that all these things have the potential to reduce the land degradation. But now the question comes that whether this one particular scheme is sufficient or not. So the answer is that yes, this scheme has a lot of potential, but then there are other steps also which need to be taken in order to tackle the large challenge of land degradation in India. So what can we do about it? What can be a way ahead along with this particular scheme? So the first thing is that policies must focus towards the afforestation and reforestation practices. We must increase the base of the natural vegetation across India. Second important component is management of the wasteland. It has been witnessed that those lands which are not utilized for agriculture or construction purposes, that is, which is the wasteland, is not having adequate protection measures in order to prevent the soil erosion. As soon as the high speed winds blow over those areas, there is a large scale soil erosion. So we must focus towards the wasteland management also. In order to prevent the floods, we must also focus on dam constructions. The riverine floods are one of the biggest reasons for the soil erosion. So to tackle the soil erosion, the dam construction can be a way ahead. Similarly, we do not just have to focus on the quantitative aspect. That is, let's say that I am able to protect the soil erosion, but I am not able to enhance or preserve its nutritional capabilities. So obviously, despite the fact that I will be having a lot of soil with me, if there is no nutrition capacity, this particular piece of land will not be able to support the biodiversity. So again, the land degradation is not just a quantitative aspect, it is a qualitative aspect also. Therefore, in order to prevent the deteriorating quality of soil, we must also reduce the pollution activities that might be in terms of industrial pollution, water pollution, air pollution, etc. Last but not the least, we must also encourage the soil conservation practices. For example, contour bunding, crop rotation, mixed cropping, cover cropping, mixed farming, etc. So these are certain measures in addition to the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, and in the similar lines, some of these practices can also be made an integral part of Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Now this topic has appeared at text and the context page. This topic is in relation to the Mediation Bill 2021 in order to promote and have an institutional mechanism of mediation in India. As far as the UPSC scheme of syllabus is concerned, this topic falls under General Studies Paper 2 section in the Polity and Governance subsection. So we will discuss this article in today's session also. First of all, the question arises that why actually India needs to promote mediation and have a stand-alone law. As far as the present situation is concerned, India is not having any stand-alone law for mediation. So, how the mediation is governed today? There are several acts, laws, or rules which govern the mediation in today's scenario in our country. For example, the Code of Civil Procedure 1908, Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996, Companies Act 2013, Commercial Courts Act 2015, Consumer Protection Act 2019. Therefore, because of the presence of several statutes, this mediation procedure in India becomes very cumbersome. There are several conflicting ideas, contradictions, and that is why, in order to enhance the efficiency and streamline this whole mediation procedure, the government came up with the Mediation Bill 2021. And after this bill came, the Parliamentary Standing Committee was tasked in order to analyze this bill and come up with certain shortcomings. And this is the very context of today's news article. So that is why in today's session we are going to deal with the important highlights of the Bill of 2021, and we will also look in brief the critical part, that what are those observations which are being given by the Parliamentary Standing Committee against this bill. So first of all comes the definition, how this bill defines the mediation. An important aspect of mediation is that it should be a voluntary process. That is, let's say there are two parties, party A and party B. They are having a conflict over certain issue, but they are not willing to go to the court. Or even if they go to the court, then the court asks them to settle this dispute by mediation. Whatever the situation is, but both the parties must agree to follow the mediation procedure. And that is when both these parties will request the third person, which will be referred to as mediator, or if it is an institution, it can be a mediation service provider. This third person or third party will assist both the parties in their attempt to reach an amicable settlement of a dispute. The second important aspect is, in order to ensure the neutrality of the mediator, it is a mandatory provision that the conflict of the interest of a mediator, if it exists, must be disclosed prior to all the proceedings of this mediation. The third aspect is that this bill also provides for the institutional mechanism of mediation, which will be under the aegis of the mediation service provider. Next component is of the pre-litigation mediation. The bill says that irrespective of any mediation agreement, both the parties shall try to settle the disputes by pre-litigation mediation before coming to the courts. That means any party, before filing any proceedings of civil or commercial nature in any court, they shall try to settle disputes by pre-litigation mediation. Now this is one of the drawback, that in this point there is an objection by the Parliamentary Standing Committee. The committee says that to seek justice, whether it is civil, criminal, or of commercial nature, is the fundamental right of every citizen of India. And further, the Article 21, which is right to life with dignity, includes the right to privacy, and this right ensures that if any citizen feels that he or she should go to the court in order to seek justice, we cannot compel that person or party to adopt for some other measures. Now, because by definition mediation is a voluntary procedure, we cannot restrict the right of any person to seek justice and make it mandatory that before coming to any court, you shall try to settle the disputes by pre-litigation mediation. Next important feature is related to the enforcement. The bill says that any decision which is given by the mediation shall be final and binding on the parties, and it shall have the degree of any judgment which is passed by some court. That is, the respect which this particular decision will carry will be equivalent to the judgment by court. Next is the institutional mechanism which will be known as the Medical Council of India. The bill says that the central government must establish the Medical Council of India, which will comprise of a chairperson, 2 full-time members, 3 ex officio members, and a part-time member. This Medical Council of India will be the overall authority to look or monitor the mediation mechanism in India. And in the last, this also provides the provision that in case of exceptional circumstances, party to the mediation can approach the court or tribunal to seek an interim relief. Now, in the last, as a matter of fact, it is important for us to know that India is a signatory to Singapore Convention on Mediation. Now, such type of informations are very relevant as far as the prelims examination is concerned. Further, you can also quote this particular convention in your mains answers. Now, this is the last topic of today's session. The topic reads, Center plans cutting the coal supplies to the plants that do not comply on biomass co-firing. In today's session, we are going to discuss this topic mainly from the prelims perspective so that you can understand what is the meaning of co-firing, what is the concept and what are its various benefits, why the government is planning to cut the coal supplies to the thermal plants which are not complying the directions given by the government, what were exactly those directions. So let us begin our discussion. This topic has appeared at page number 12. And the background of this particular issue was that in 2021, the Power Ministry of India said that all the thermal power plants in our country must ensure 5% of their fuel consumption or the energy which they are using to produce some other form of energy must be via co-firing technique. And they should ensure that this 5% target is met by October 2022. So roughly 1 year's time period was given. Now, what do you understand by co-firing? As the name is suggesting, it is combining more than one fuel types in order to run the thermal power plants. It can be two or it can be more than two as well. So the co-firing is the combustion of two different types of materials at the same time. That means, let's say, if a thermal power plant is using coal as its dominant fuel, it can also mix this coal with, let's say, biomass. If any power plant is using coal and biomass in order to generate some electricity, then we will say that that particular plant is operating on co-firing basis. Now, this particular technique is obviously environment friendly because let's say earlier you were using 100 units of coal to produce some specific amount of electricity. But now, because you are also using biomass, so that means now you are using just 95 units of coal and 5 units of biomass to make that same amount of electricity. So obviously you have reduced the coal input by 5 units and in turn has compensated it with 5 units of biomass, which is relatively a cleaner mode of energy. Another benefit of this is that you don't have to construct altogether the new power plants because you can use the new type of fuel, that is biomass, in the same power plant which you were operating, and hence it is cost effective also, and no large scale dismantling is involved in order to shift towards co-firing. Now, our finance minister in her budget speech has said that substituting around 5 to 7% of the coal with biomass in coal-based power plants can save up to 38 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions. Now, this shows the huge potential of co-firing in India. In this very line, we should also know that what is the SAMARTHA mission. The full form of SAMARTHA in this particular context is Sustainable Agrarian Mission on Use of Biomass in Coal-Based Thermal Power Plants. That means it is related to the co-firing. In this particular mission, the government is aiming to use the agricultural residues as the fuel for co-firing. Now this again has several environmental as well as economic benefits because now we can tackle the problem of stubble burning. If we can use these stubbles as agricultural residues in the co-firing plant, then on one hand we are reducing the stubble burning, on the other hand we are not compromising with the electricity generation in our country. So this is how the co-firing plants work. and we have certain specific targets to be met. So that's all for today. I hope today's session has added value to your preparation. All the very best and study hard.